This is the Future of IP Protection podcast, brought to you by Mark Vision. This show is dedicated to arming companies with the skills, know-how, and technology they will need to future-proof their IP protection strategy for the years ahead.
Welcome to another episode of the Future of IP Protection. Today, we're joined by Steve Lamar, the driving force behind the American Apparel and Footwear Association for the past 25 years. As president and CEO, Steve has consistently championed for the apparel and footwear industry, guiding policy wins and advocating for the enhancement of IP protection. Hi, Steve. It's such a pleasure to have you with us.
And Branddy, how you doing? Great to join you.
Great. Well, why don't we start by having you tell us about yourself, your background, and how you landed at the AAFA? And maybe for those who are not familiar with the AAFA, can you give us a little bit of info on the organization and its mission?
Sure. So the American Apparel and Footwear Association, AAFA, we are the public policy voice of the apparel and footwear industry and accessories industry, their suppliers. We work on a variety of areas, brand protection, obviously what we're talking about today, supply chain and sourcing, and trade logistics and manufacturing. And the goal really is to kind of unite the industry around common advocacy initiatives, common educational initiatives, common best policy, best practice initiatives, and along those three pillars that I just mentioned. I come to the organization as a public policy advocate. I've been sort of in the public policy space in one form or another for about 40 years. And as you mentioned, I just celebrated my 25th anniversary at AAFA, doing work in really all fields: trade policy, brand protection, government contracting, sustainability, and so on. And it's a great organization for a great industry.
Obviously, you guys cover quite a bit. I'm curious about specifically what elements do you find particularly most exciting about this industry and that work?
I talk about what I refer to as kind of the three T's. So that's traceability, transparency, and trust. And, if you look back at, I think 10 years from now, when we look back at this part of this time that we're in, we're going to find that, this is the time that supply chains and logistics chains and really the industry overall has become more transparent and traceable than ever before. And there's a lot of reasons for that. It's super important from a sustainability perspective, super important from a compliance perspective, to be able to assure consumers that what they're getting is what they're paying for. And that brings in the last T of trust. Consumers increasingly want to know, am I getting, the right information? Am I getting authentic products? And I think those three concepts of traceability, transparency, and trust kind of really unite a lot of our work that we're doing right now. And it certainly wants to make me come to work every day.
I love the three T's. That's very interesting. Obviously, there are numerous facets involved there. So I wonder, Steve, when you think about the current state of IP protection, brand protection, especially as it pertains to the intricacies of supply chain and apparel and footwear, how would you describe it?
So busy. We often refer to as there are so many things that are kind of coming our way and coming our members' ways, and constantly trying to manage a variety of challenges. A lot of our work occurs in the kind of environmental and social responsibility space. I start here because this is particularly important in our brand protection efforts. When folks buy a counterfeit product, they're not only buying a product that is stealing somebody's identity and stealing somebody's job, but they're also buying a product that was likely made under bad working conditions. It was made with bad chemical management practices and other shortcuts in the social responsibility area. We actually did a test recently where we bought a bunch of counterfeit products on purpose to test them and say, what's really going on here? And we found that about 38% of the items, when we tested them, actually had dangerously or poisonously high levels of lead or cadmium, other heavy metals. They had other product safety dangers, and really equated the concept of, if you are buying, or if someone is buying a counterfeit good, they're not just buying a product that, is a knockoff. They're buying a product that has hidden dangers that, it's not just quality issues, but it can make you quite likely make you sick, or was made with, forced labor or underpaid worker or child labor, things that legitimate and authentic supply chains are constantly on guard for, constantly trying to stamp out. But on the counterfeit side, that stuff happens. And, we often will say that, you can't be excited about a good deal on your fake bag and at the same time be for responsible production. You can't have those two beliefs at the same time. Yet we often hear many times that folks are buying counterfeits as a way of saving money, thinking that all they're doing is saving money. That's not what's happening at all.
No, those two things are definitely completely at odds. And it's interesting when you talk about the safety factors and those chemicals that make their way into the manufacture of apparel and footwear, because people often might be considering a safety issue for different types of products and not necessarily on something like that. So yeah, those are definitely some big challenges, and certainly consumers should be aware of something like that. Looking ahead, what do you think are perhaps some of the big challenges coming the way for in the next decade for this industry?
Well, it's sort of really focusing on brand protection with that. I would say the biggest challenge is probably indifference and acceptance, and if you kind of look at brand protection, just to really overly simplify it, counterfeits kind of come in two different forms. There are the folks that, and I mentioned them before, right? The folks that want to buy counterfeits, they think it's okay. I'm doing it to save money. I'm doing it because no one's really getting hurt. The EU IP office, they've been doing a bunch of surveys over the last couple of years, and they're constantly finding that there's high levels of acceptance of counterfeits. That it's especially among younger people who are they're trying to stretch their paycheck. That it's okay. And I think we need to do a better job. We, is the collective we, the global we, need to do a better job of, equating counterfeits with, these very, very heinous practices. If you were buying a counterfeit, you were buying a product very likely made with forced labor. Like literally just make that very clear to people so that they understand that counterfeits are problematic for a variety of reasons. And I think that education also helps the second problem. And the second problem is sort of a different level of acceptance. It's sort of a cost of doing business. It's that, well, there's no matter how hard we try, there's always going to be counterfeits. That's kind of okay, and it's not okay. Third-party marketplaces, online third-party marketplaces, especially with the dramatic increase in e-commerce over the last couple of years, you see lots and lots of counterfeits on these sites, and those are counterfeits that are sometimes they're posing as counterfeits, right? Which is really bad. But many times, they're posing as legitimate products. So you or I or many, many consumers, we go on to a website, we buy a product, it shows up in a couple of days, and voila, in comes a counterfeit. We think it's authentic, and it's not. And so it's got product safety problems. It doesn't match our values. If there's quality problems, if for whatever reason we need to send it back or we have a bad experience with this, visibly a bad experience with it, we now blame the brand, thinking that it came from the brand when it didn't come from the brand at all. And again, I think the challenge is we need to spend a lot more time making sure that the platforms are doing their part, that they're being held accountable, that they're proactive in ensuring that only authentic merchandise is sold. It's not simply a cost of doing business. It is actually intolerable to have a counterfeit on their site. Even one counterfeit is too much.
Absolutely. So leading on that, with technology evolving so quickly, do you think that IP protection laws are going to need to adapt in order to keep up with some of these new developments?
Yeah, absolutely. And I often talk about, the need, we need to constantly update our IP tactics and strategies, the legislative and the regulatory frameworks for a variety of reasons. But the main reason is because of the speed at which the counterfeiters themselves are adapting to new opportunities to traffic their awful merchandise. They're constantly pioneering and finding new ways to get their products into our living rooms. And unless we are running at full speed to kind of meet that challenge, we're going backwards because they're just so good at pioneering and developing new techniques. And I hate to use the word good when I'm talking about counterfeiters, but no, they have been very, very active at learning new ways to get into your pocketbook and into your living rooms. There's been some success, as you know, in the last couple of years. Last year, Congress, people complained that Congress doesn't do a lot of things. Well, last year they did something pretty cool, which was to pass the Inform Act, which is to give consumers more information about, the word, certainly for large scale sellers on some of these platforms, the identity of who they're buying from. But that's just, a first part of many steps that we need to take. The next step, of course, is we need to get legislation passed at the federal level, and I think probably at the state level too, on ShopSafe, which is to make sure that platforms do more, that they are held accountable to prevent dangerous counterfeits from even getting onto their websites in the first place.
Absolutely. And I know that you guys are playing a big role on some of that on the back end. On the topic of preparedness, how important do you think it is for brands to establish a fortified IP brand protection strategy? And can you share perhaps some fundamental components of what a successful strategy might look like?
I think it's absolutely important. It is quite literally existentially important, right? Because if you don't establish this, someone else is going to walk in, grab your brand identity, and walk away. Like literally, they're going to take your identity away from you, and that's not acceptable. I think there's a lot of elements that can go into this. I'll just touch on a couple of them. One of them is collaboration, right? And collaboration with your trade associations. And again, I certainly encourage anyone that's a brand in our industry, in our space, to be part of our group because we're helping to lead the way in a lot of these practices, policies, regulations, and so forth. We have a brand protection council. They're very, very active. I think the second piece is engagement. And this is, engagement with your peers, with the policymakers, with the e-commerce platforms themselves. I mean, we like to say that the e-commerce platforms need to do a better job, and they do, but we need to constantly be connected to those platforms to make sure that they have information to help them do that better job, right? I mean, I think there's a lot more they can be doing, but they're not going to do it all on their own. We need to be part of that as well. And also to keep an eye on them, right? To make sure that they are doing what they have promised to do. Sometimes, with the best of intentions, they'll promise to do something, but they may be slow to roll it out. And we just need to kind of accelerate those efforts. And I think the third thing is for brand protection professionals in companies to educate your colleagues in the companies. I mean, we hear these stories all the time where companies will talk about how some of their work colleagues will talk about dupes, and dupe is kind of a sort of an okay term, and it's okay. I got a good deal on a dupe or something like that. And I think, again, there needs to be this concept all the way up and down that from the C-suite all the way down and really horizontally throughout the organization, that any kind of counterfeit is intolerable. And to make sure that even those individuals that aren't directly associated with brand protection efforts understand that those efforts are going on, because they can also be eyes and ears to support the brand protection professionals' efforts. Because as I said, at the end of the day, it's an existential threat.
Yeah, that absolutely is true. I love the idea of that education internally within your own company. Obviously, everybody has to play a role. And then, of course, you mentioned collaboration. Now, let's take collaboration to a whole nother side of things. There has been a shift, right, with brands now approaching design and collaborate. They collaborate a lot more. There's more open source approaches and brands collaborating with each other, right? So how do you see the role of IP protection transforming within the apparel and footwear sectors in those terms?
Yeah, that's a great question. Look, we're going to have to, it kind of goes back to what I said before about making sure that we continue to evolve our approaches from both the legislative and regulatory side, but also on the technology side. We're going to have to become smarter, continue to become smarter as we're collaborating. Those collaborations, if there aren't, good guardrails around them, for example, they could result in problems of where, people they trip each other up. They interfere with each other in a way that they didn't mean to. So, clear delineation of, who's doing what. I think this also touches on the concept of trust that I mentioned before as well. It's just, trust among brands and trust among the technology providers. Of course, this really kind of, I think, takes us into the whole world of AI, which is a new powerful way for us to interact with each other, but it also means we have to have more steps to make sure we know the provenance of items that we create with AI. Right? We have all this AI-enabled technologies that are creating a vast wealth of content and ways of expressing that content. And where is that coming from? And I think, one of the contours that we're going to be seeing over the next couple of years is how AI and brand protection interact with each other. And I can't pretend to know how that contour is going to go, but that's certainly an area where I think everybody needs to be spending time kind of understanding and constantly refreshing their knowledge base on that.
For sure. I mean, it's clear that the terrain is definitely shifting. And with those changes, there are bound to be some missteps, of course. So, Steve, based on what you have observed, what do you see as some of the more common mistakes, perhaps, that brands might make when it comes to protecting their IP?
I think there's probably a lot, but I hit a couple of them. I think the first one is, if you don't take advantage of the tools that already exist, right? There are a lot of tools out there in terms of registering your own IP, both with government agencies as well as with platforms. The various tools the platforms have identified, the whole network of solution providers that exist out there, such as yourself, that really create a framework that you can use to register, protect, and investigate challenges to your IP. And you'd be surprised at how many brands just kind of assume that that's already occurring, or that there really isn't a trouble. There isn't a problem. They don't believe they've been counterfeited yet, or they don't believe they've been knocked off. And so having a robust process in place to register, protect, defend against, I think is really important. And there's a lot of times that people won't even take those basic steps. And I think the second thing is when companies don't engage and tell their story. And again, we're a Washington-based organization, and so we're constantly urging our members to engage and tell their story with their members of Congress, with their senators, with their House members, locally elected officials, all the places where they have some representation. Members of Congress, senators, they want to hear that. They want to know about who their constituents are and how they can help them, right? And if there's a problem, how they can deploy their skill sets to help those constituents. And if you don't engage, the members won't know, right? The members of Congress won't know. And so I think that's often a missed opportunity.
Interesting. Those pitfalls are definitely something to be wary of. On a more conceptual level, how do you balance the need for brand protection, intellectual property protection, with the potential for stifling innovation and creativity?
I actually think IP is necessary for innovation, and it's a pillar for the American economy. I mean, I think this is what we're built on, is our creativity, our innovation, our growth, our economic development. I think all springs from the IP economy that we have. And so I think the more we can do to protect the economy, to delineate that, to protect the IP economy, to tell the story about why that is so important to the rest of the economy, to create jobs and economic opportunities, I think the better. So I don't really see it so much as a balance, as sort of a step one and a step two.
Interesting. All right. Well, obviously striking that balance is, I think, a little bit of an art form, but now let's gaze into the horizon and look at 5 years from now. How do you see the future of IP protection? What's it look like to you?
I think over the next 5 years, in addition to talking about, the traceability and the transparency trends that I mentioned before, I think more of our world is going to be online. So more cyber, more meta, and then more is going to be dependent on AI. So there's definitely going to be a bigger technology piece for all of us and for brand protection going forward. And I think IP protection is going to really need to kind of evolve around that particular contour to continue to fully tap the technologies that exist, because the threats are going to continue to tap many of those same technologies. And so building the guardrails against those threats, but also pioneering the technologies so we can be better prepared for those threats, I think it's going to be really important. As I said, we have to harness these technologies and at the same time, making sure that they don't overpower our own ability to protect IP going forward.
Absolutely. Okay, well, as we close our conversation, what are 3 pieces of actionable advice that you would give fashion apparel brands that are looking to succeed at protecting their intellectual property?
Well, I assume the first piece of advice I've got to give is they should be a member of the AAFA. They certainly should join, because I think our Brand Protection Council and the kind of overall work we do, not just on brand protection, but the way we connect that to other areas that are central to how apparel, footwear, retail, fashion brands work is absolutely critical. I would go back and draw upon the point I made before about, collaboration, engagement, and education is absolutely critical. I think that's one of those things where you put those in place, and then in a month or 2 months, you kind of look back and say, am I still doing enough? I think how you are today isn't necessarily going to guide you over the next couple of years. You're constantly going to have to change that. And I think the third one is to be open-minded to the ways in which IP challenges are going to challenge you in the future. When we look at the U.S. Trade Representative, one of the government agencies, and for many years they had they still do this Notorious Markets Report, and we're actually right in the middle of preparing our comments for the annual Notorious Markets Report. But 25 years ago, when it was launched, it was a physical thing. It was like the U.S. government was really looking at foreign physical marketplaces that exist around the world, and they wanted the industry to help identify those foreign physical marketplaces. Well, then it became an online concept, and now most of our work on this is on the online piece, not on the physical piece. And when we look at the online piece, we're not just looking at foreign marketplaces, we're looking at U.S. marketplaces too. So there's this very unique report that the U.S. government does that's completely evolved from its original concept. And I think we as a public policy community need to really be open-minded to how the brand protection issue is going to evolve over time, and not be stuck in the way we used to do it just because it met some neat little requirements. So I think being open-minded for future challenges is certainly something we should be looking at.
For sure. I mean, you've touched on it. Obviously, the bad actors are leveraging all the tools in their toolbox to the fullest extent. So, brands need to take that a step above and beyond, obviously, as you mentioned, by collaborating, engaging, and educating. So that's wonderful. Well, unfortunately, that is all the time we're going to have today. But before we do end it here, if our listeners would love to get in touch with you or learn more about the AAFA, where might they go?
They should go to our website, aafaglobal.org, or they can send me an email, slamar@aafaglobal.org. And we've got a lot of great resources, and we can connect them up to whoever they want to talk to.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Steve. It's been a very enlightening conversation. Really, really enjoyed it.
Super. Thanks so much for having me on.
Thanks for listening to the Future of IP Protection podcast, brought to you by Mark Vision. If you enjoyed today's show, please do us a favor and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And if you'd like to learn more about how Mark Vision can help you transform your IP protection strategy, visit us at markvision.com. Thanks again, and I'll catch you on the next episode.